For people who grew up in the 1960s, rock wasn't just music, it was identity. It was rebellion, freedom, danger, and discovery, all happening at once. The radio wasn't background noise, it was a lifeline. Every new single felt like a message from another world, shaping the culture, the fashion, the politics, and the dreams of an entire generation. Many songs from that era are still famous today. Younger listeners know the titles, recognize the hooks, maybe even admire the legends behind them. But there are certain tracks, certain moments, that only those who lived through the 1960s can fully feel. Songs that weren't just hits, but experiences. Songs tied to dances, protests, heartbreaks, and nights when the world felt like it was changing by the hour. These are the 10 rock songs that carry that power. Songs only true 60s kids will ever understand. Number 10. House of the Rising Sun. The Animals, 1964. For younger generations, House of the Rising Sun is just a haunting folk rock classic. But for those who were teenagers in 1964, it was something earth-shaking. The exact moment British rock turned darker, heavier, and more serious. Eric Burdon's vocal didn't sound like pop. It sounded ancient, wounded, and mysterious. The hypnotic arpeggio on the electric guitar felt like nothing on American radio at the time. To listeners growing up in the 60s, the song wasn't just unusual. It was unsettling in the best possible way, opening the door to deeper, moodier rock. Many fans remember hearing it late at night on AM radio, when the world felt quiet and the song's eerie storytelling felt almost forbidden. And because the subject matter was so adult, gambling, sin, regret, teenagers secretly adored it. It was one of the first songs that made them feel older than they were. To people who lived through the decade, House of the Rising Sun wasn't just a hit. It was a warning shot that the innocence of early 60s music was ending, and rock was about to grow up. Number 9. Born to be Wild. Steppenwolf, 1968. To younger listeners, Born to be Wild is the song they associate with motorcycles, leather jackets, and classic movie soundtracks. But for those who grew up in the 1960s, this track wasn't a stereotype. It was a revolution. It was the moment rock stopped being merely rebellious and became dangerous. When Steppenwolf released this song in 1968, the world was on fire. Protests, counterculture, Vietnam, generational divides. And then suddenly here was a track that didn't just reflect the chaos, it embodied it. The distorted guitars felt like engines revving. The pounding beat felt like freedom on two wheels, and John Kay's vocal had the raw edge of someone who refused to live by anyone else's rules. People who lived through that decade don't just remember this song, they remember where they were when they first heard it. Some heard it blasting from a friend's garage. Others heard it at parties where everything felt louder, wilder, and less predictable. And when Easy Rider arrived a year later, the song became a cultural symbol, the soundtrack to a generation rejecting the old world and riding towards something unknown. Number 8. Sunshine of Your Love. Cream, 1967. Younger generations hear Sunshine of Your Love and think of it as a cool, bluesy riff, one of the most recognizable in rock history. But for those who grew up in the late 60s, the song hit differently. It felt like the birth of heavy rock, a new sound that no one had words for yet. When Cream released this track in 1967, most rock music was still bright, melodic, and driven by jangly guitars. Then suddenly, here was a riff, deep, thick, and almost menacing, built on a descending blues pattern that shook the walls of every teenage bedroom and garage band rehearsal in America. People who lived through that moment remember how physical the song felt. It wasn't just heard, it was absorbed. Eric Clapton's guitar tone was unlike anything on the radio, and Jack Bruce's rolling bass line glued everything together with a weight listeners weren't used to. Ginger Baker's drumming, mixing rock with jazz rhythms, made the song pulse like something alive. For 60s kids, it was the first time rock sounded big. Many remember buying the single or hearing it spin on FM radio late at night, when it felt like a secret initiation into a new, heavier world of music. To those who grew up in that era, Sunshine of Your Love wasn't just a hit. It was the moment rock discovered its power. Number 7, Light My Fire. The Doors, 1967. To younger listeners, Light My Fire is a psychedelic classic, smooth, hypnotic, and forever attached to Jim Morrison's leather-clad mystique. But for those who grew up in the late 60s, this song wasn't just another radio favorite, it was a cultural awakening, the sound of rock stepping into darker, deeper, more mysterious emotional territory. When the Doors released this track in 1967, nothing else on mainstream radio sounded remotely like it. The 7-minute album version felt endless, intoxicating, and strangely dangerous. Ray Manzarek's swirling organ line felt like stepping into another dimension, while Robbie Krieger's guitar solo stretched longer than anything pop stations were used to playing. Many teenagers heard it for the first time on underground FM radio, back when DJs played full-length tracks without interruption, and it felt like discovering a secret world. But the real shock was Jim Morrison. His voice wasn't cheerful or reassuring like most male singers of the era. It was seductive, cryptic, and unpredictable. 60s kids remember how thrilling and unsettling it was to hear a rock song delivered with that kind of theatrical darkness. Morrison didn't sound like he wanted to entertain you. He sounded like he wanted to pull you somewhere you weren't sure you should go. For those who lived through the decade, Light My Fire wasn't a psychedelic anthem. It was the sound of innocence burning away and rock music stepping into adulthood. Number 6, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. The Rolling Stones, 1965. To today's listeners, Satisfaction is a classic rock anthem, instantly recognizable, endlessly quoted, and almost taken for granted. But for those who grew up in the mid-60s, this song felt like a riot breaking through the radio. When the Rolling Stones released it in 1965, rock music was still expected to be clean, upbeat, and polite. Then came Keith Richards' fuzz-soaked guitar riff, a sound so distorted and aggressive that many radio stations initially refused to play it. For 60s kids, that riff wasn't just catchy, it was revolutionary. It felt like electricity, rebellion, and attitude all fused into one impossible-to-ignore sound. Mick Jagger's vocals hit just as hard. His snarl, his frustration, his barely concealed anger at consumerism and conformity. Those emotions were new to mainstream music. Teenagers heard themselves in it, parents hated it, and that made it even better. Many people who lived through the decade still remember the first time they heard the opening notes coming from a car radio or a jukebox. It felt raw, direct, and confrontational in a way no Beatles song ever had. The world suddenly felt different, louder, dirtier, more honest. For those who grew up in the 60s, Satisfaction wasn't just a hit single. It was the moment rock and roll finally developed teeth and refused to be anything but rebellious. Number 5, Good Vibrations. The Beach Boys, 1966. To younger listeners, Good Vibrations is a sunny, feel-good classic. Bright harmonies, catchy melodies, and California pop perfection. But for those who grew up in the 1960s, this song wasn't just a radio hit, it was a revelation. It proved that pop music could be as ambitious, as complex, and as innovative as anything in classical or jazz. When Brian Wilson released Good Vibrations in 1966, nothing like it had ever existed. 60s kids remember hearing it for the first time and realizing the production sounded bigger, stranger, more colorful. The song wasn't recorded in a single take or even a single studio. Wilson stitched together dozens of modular sections, each with different instruments, moods, and arrangements, long before sampling or editing together were industry norms. And then there was the theremin-like electro-theremin line, a futuristic swooping tone that felt like it had beamed in from another planet. To listeners at the time, it was shockingly new, a sound that didn't belong in traditional pop, but somehow made perfect sense here. Teenagers in the 60s remember how the song's shifts, from lush harmonies to bass-driven grooves to swirling choruses, felt like a journey, a kaleidoscope, something beyond anything else on the radio. For those who lived through the decade, Good Vibrations wasn't just innovative, it was proof that rock and pop could be art, crafted with imagination instead of formulas. Number 4, Purple Haze. Jimi Hendrix, 1967. To younger generations, Purple Haze is simply Hendrix doing what Hendrix does: wild guitar, psychedelic vibes, and a voice soaked in mystery. But for those who grew up in the late 60s, this song was something far more shocking. It was the sound of the future punching a hole through the present. When Purple Haze hit in 1967, rock fans had never heard a guitar behave like that. Jimmy wasn't just playing notes, he was bending them, tearing them apart, and reshaping them into something new. The opening riff felt like a lightning bolt. His use of fuzz, distortion, and the now iconic Hendrix chord made listeners feel like the rules of music were collapsing in real time. People who lived through that moment still talk about hearing the song for the first time, blasting from a friend's stereo, pouring out of an FM station, or shaking the walls of a record shop. The sound was alien, almost dangerous, and unmistakably brilliant. Teenagers embraced it immediately. Parents hated it instantly, and that divide only made it more powerful. Hendrix's vocal delivery added to the mystique, cool, cryptic, and unlike any frontman who came before him. To 60s kids, he wasn't just a musician, he was a portal to a world where anything was possible. For them, Purple Haze wasn't just a song, it was the moment rock became truly psychedelic, breaking free from every boundary it once had. Number 3, Like a Rolling Stone, Bob Dylan, 1965. To younger listeners, Like a Rolling Stone is often praised as a lyrical masterpiece, dense, poetic, and endlessly analyzed. But for those who grew up in the 60s, this song wasn't an academic exercise. It was a cultural earthquake, the moment rock music grew sharper teeth and a sharper tongue. When the track dropped in 1965, nothing about it matched the expectations of the time. Songs were supposed to be short, sweet, and simple. Then Dylan arrived with a 6-minute, sneering epic powered by rage, wit, and an attitude no one had ever dared to put on mainstream radio. 60s kids remember how shocking it was to hear a song that didn't try to please. It confronted, it challenged, it spoke directly to a generation tired of pretending everything was fine. Al Kooper's swirling organ line, famously added by accident, became the heartbeat of the track, and Mike Bloomfield's guitar crackled with a wildness rock fans instantly recognized as new territory. Dylan's voice, raw and unpolished, cut through the air like a verdict, unapologetic, rebellious, and utterly real. For teenagers of the era, Like a Rolling Stone felt like someone was finally saying the things they were afraid to say out loud. It wasn't just a hit. It was a mirror held up to the decade's disillusionment. To those who lived through the 60s, this song didn't change music. It changed them. Number 2, A Day in the Life, The Beatles, 1967. To younger listeners, A Day in the Life is simply an ambitious, experimental Beatles track. But for those who actually lived through 1967, this song was a moment in history, the exact point where pop music crossed into something deeper, stranger, and undeniably revolutionary. When Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band arrived, fans expected brilliance. What they didn't expect was a song that sounded like two different worlds stitched together. Lennon's verses felt like drifting through a dream, detached, poetic, almost eerily calm. Then came McCartney's middle section, upbeat and grounded like real life rushing in without warning. The contrast was stunning to listeners of the decade. But the true shock was the orchestral chaos. Teenagers who bought the LP remember sitting on the floor, staring at their speakers, completely stunned as the orchestra climbed higher and higher into a dizzying swirl of sound. Nothing like that had ever been attempted in rock. It felt cinematic, overwhelming, and even frightening, as if music itself was breaking apart and reforming into something new. And then, of course, the final chord, that enormous hanging piano crash that seemed to last forever. 60s kids still remember the goosebumps. To those who lived in the era, A Day in the Life wasn't just ahead of its time, it was the sound of the world shifting. Number 1, Gimme Shelter, The Rolling Stones, 1969. To younger generations, Gimme Shelter is a dark, powerful Stones classic, one of the band's greatest recordings. But for those who actually lived through the final years of the 1960s, this song was more than a masterpiece. It was a warning, a snapshot of a world teetering on the edge. When Gimme Shelter arrived in 1969, the optimism of the early decade had evaporated. Vietnam was raging, protests were turning violent, and the counterculture was beginning to fracture. And then the Stones released a song that didn't just reflect the chaos, it sounded like the chaos. 60s kids vividly remember hearing that eerie, storm-like guitar intro for the first time. It felt like walking into trouble you couldn't avoid. Mick Jagger's vocals carried fear, anger, and exhaustion all at once. Keith Richards' guitar didn't just play a riff. It built an atmosphere heavy enough to feel physical. And when Mary Clayton unleashed her unforgettable, cracking scream on rape, murder, teenagers of the era sat frozen. It wasn't entertainment, it was reality. To those who lived through the decade, the song captured what the news couldn't. It felt like the perfect soundtrack to a world unraveling. A world where the dream of peace and love was slipping away. For 60s kids, Gimme Shelter wasn't just a rock song. It was the sound of the storm they survived.